Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Poodling Around. Now, here's a quick question for you. Just how observant are you when you're walking around a city? Do you spot all the interesting things around you, or just go from A to B in as quick a time as possible? The reason that I'm asking you this is that today's guest, Anja Phoenix, is making a compelling argument for opening your eyes wherever you live and observing all that cityscapes offer. She's even produced 2 urban hiking maps to help people do that, in both London and Manchester. So what exactly is urban hiking? I interviewed Anja to find out. Right, so as listeners of previous podcast episodes will know, you're well known for your children's tale trails and story walks around Cumbria. But today, Anja, we're going to talk to you about something that's potentially more adult focused, I guess, which is urban hiking. So perhaps I should start by asking you to define what urban hiking is.
For me, urban hiking is going into a built-up area or an urban area with a slightly different mindset to one you might usually have, whether you're just going to work or perhaps meeting with friends at a certain bar where you might have a set route, to go into a city or a town with just a different mindset, perhaps of slowing down a little bit so that you can notice a little bit more, or a curious mindset.
Yeah. Now, you've written what we can describe as urban hikes, one for London and one for Manchester. So how did you get into that?
So I'd never done an urban hike before, but I was doing some work alongside Regatta, the outdoor clothing company, and they're based near Manchester. And they said, well, why don't we do a story trail for the city centre? I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds like quite a cool idea, actually. So we had a little chat about the cities we'd like to do. And we thought we'd start with London and Manchester because I grew up just south of Manchester, so knew it quite well. And London just because it's an amazing, vibrant capital. And we thought, yeah, let's go for that as well. So we had a big period of research and chatting to lots of different people, and myself just going and just walking around the city for days, basically, just to get to know it. A different mindset for me, because I knew Manchester from going out in the 1990s there, and enjoying the nightlife. But to come back, as a mum, as a grown up, and to discover it in a completely different way, it was amazing. I felt like it was a new city, but it was great getting to re-know it and exploring further afield, and just taking time to get to know it as it was, now, as opposed to in the 90s, and it has changed.
So were you a little bit nervous because you've done so much in the countryside with the children's story walks? Were you a bit apprehensive about doing this sort of new departure and looking at the urban environment instead?
I wouldn't say apprehensive. I was excited. And it's interesting because everything was plain sailing until it came to the mapping of it. And what I realised is just how linear cities are. I'm used to curvy lines and exploring through woodlands, and natural lines. And actually in the city to create a map with grids and lines was really challenging, because I was like, I've got to get this accurate. I sort of wasn't used to that before. But in terms of exploring it, I didn't feel nervous, because I just love going into a new environment and discovering things. And it was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah. So was this kind of linear mapping, was that the main difference then between doing the outdoor country trails and the kind of urban city trails?
Yeah, and I'd say another difference was just the amount of layers in a city, like the layers of history and the layers of culture. And just the thing that really got me was just how incredible it is to see the natural world intermingling with the urban environment. It's just fascinating. And especially now, the last few years, in places around Canal Street, Sackville Street, they're making these amazing urban gardens. You can go and sit there on a hot summer's day and just cool down, under a beautiful tropical tree, and it's just, I love that interaction between the man-made environment and the natural environment.
Yeah, I suppose you saw a few green roofs here and there where they're trying to kind of like encourage the wildlife again. And, that's a big part of the urban environment, isn't it? Trying to reintroduce these green areas.
Yeah, because Manchester's not a massively green city. There's very few green spaces, really. London's a lot leafier.
Yeah, a lot more parks, I would imagine, in London than in Manchester. So if someone's going to undertake one of your urban hikes, what sort of footwear do they need to be wearing? Is it going to be quite strenuous?
Yeah, I suppose it was an unusual one for me, because you know, in my teens, my 20s, going into Manchester, I had to make sure I was fashionable, you know, and it's very important back then as a teen, not have the right, you know, peel on my Doc Martens, and it didn't matter if I got blisters on my feet, and I'd stomp round to Affleck's Palace, you know. Whereas so for these last two, I had on my walking gear, you know, and pair of walking shoes or my trainers, you know, and just went for it, because I knew I'd be really clocking up the mileage, you know. So in a day of mapping, I might walk 10 miles, you know, because I do the route 3 or 4 times, and in different directions and at different times of day, and in morning and night. So I was really sort of getting those miles up. So I would absolutely suggest for people just to wear really, really comfortable clothing. Take a waterproof with you. Manchester can be quite rainy.
Definitely.
And if it's summer, just to be aware of just how hot it can get. You know, there's little microclimates in cities, you know, where there might be a small courtyard, an alleyway that's getting direct sunlight, and the temperature there could be twice as hot as somewhere leafy or by the water's edge, like the canals, you know. So I think it's just being aware that actually, even though it's an urban environment, you have to be quite prepared on some of the days if it's, you know, if it's an extreme temperature, hot or cold.
Yes, be prepared for everything. So now, sort of moving on to the London urban hike, which was of great interest to me, because Covent Garden's one of my favourite places. I used to sort of hang out there on a Saturday morning quite a lot when I lived in London. But why did you kind of descend on Covent Garden as kind of the focal point for that trail? What was it about that particular area that attracted you to it?
I think it was just all the little snickets or alleyways or Lonnings, wherever part of the country you're in. There's these secret little alleyways going off really, really busy focal points like Trafalgar Square. You know, 1 minute away, you're down this beautiful little street, opening up into this Victorian street with these amazing old bookshops, you know, and models of ears and modern art on the walls you have to really look out for. And just, I love the fact that Covent Garden is, you know, so in the heart of everything and such close proximity to big tourist areas, but yet you can find these amazing places of calm and colour. And so I was just really drawn to that area.
I think I know the bookshop road that you're talking about. Is absolutely divine, isn't it? Something out of Harry Potter. But what hidden gems did you discover around Covent Garden? Is there anything you can share with us that you discovered that just blew your mind in a way?
There was a couple of things. Going back to the layers of history, there was a beautiful little church, and right down sort of in the vaults underneath, they'd discovered a Celtic spring, which there was still water running there. You know, and they found signs of people having worshipped there, you know, 3,000 years ago, you know, and it's still there. And there's this whole hidden world underneath the streets of London, you know, which you can kind of access, can't you, on the tube, which is fantastic, but there's all sorts going on there that we don't know about, and there's probably still covered over, you know. So things like that I found absolutely incredible. So visiting beneath the older buildings. And then there was a little courtyard called Ching's Court, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And it was just like this quiet little oasis in the middle of all the hustle and bustle, just of a completely different culture. So I really enjoyed those two places.
Because I mean, I've sort of looked at that guide that you've put together, and there are things on there that I've never seen in Covent Garden, and I've been there so often. I have seen the spiral stairs in the tube station and have climbed them a few times when the lift isn't working. But I think you found some ears, didn't you, and an Agatha Christie statue, and I've just never seen those things.
And little old pubs where Charles Dickens used to drink and things like that, and Seven Dials, you know, the old columns and how they link to the history. And it was just absolutely fascinating. And I think the only reason I saw them, because I'm not from London, I don't know London very well at all, but the only reason I got to see all these things was through researching, but also just taking that time to walk ever so slowly, you know, and look all around me and stop and chat to people. And it's just having that time, being time rich for the day, just making that decision, right, this is what I'm going to do today.
And I think you have some advice, don't you, about looking up, looking down, and looking all around.
I found that very helpful in an urban environment, because I think you can automatically do it in a natural environment. You know, you might hear a bird song above you in the trees, and so you'll automatically look up. And there's something about the natural world that's, you know, there's little pinpoints that help you look around and look up and look down, or you might see a creature scurrying across a path beneath you. But when you're in an urban environment, I think you need prompts to do that. So that's why a little trail like this might be quite helpful.
Yes. And I think that you said, you've already mentioned that you sort of also branched off into Trafalgar Square. And I think you found, was it the world's smallest police station in Trafalgar Square?
Yeah, apparently it is. I don't know if that's true or not.
That's incredible.
But I do like that about these trails, that you can make them a little bit mystical and magical. You know, when you talk to a local person, oh, did you know this? I don't think there's anything wrong with putting a bit of folklore into these things, you know, and everyday chatter. Did you know that this person used to drink here? And, you know, and I think that's great. Put that in. Is it 100% true? I don't know. It may be, it may not be, but it's brilliant because it gets you curious and it gets you visiting and seeing, you know, so yeah.
And I think that's the thing about cities. I think you have to have that curious mindset, don't you? I mean, I find it quite easy to do because I love photography. So I will naturally be looking through my lens and finding strange things on walls. But I think, you know, anybody doing it for the first time who perhaps isn't into photography like me would need to have sort of a real open mind, open eyes, and just absorb what's there and see what there is. Because I guess, you know, although you've provided these trails for these cities, people could do this in other cities as well, couldn't they? And could, you know, do their own thing and just wherever they live, start to walk around and actually observe a bit more what's going on and what the buildings look like and what features are there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, you know, you only need to, you know, as a family, I think there was family of 4 did the Manchester one, and they covered, without realizing it, 5 miles with 2 little ones, which is quite a long way. You know, I think they'd only intended to go to one venue, but then they got there and they thought, oh, I wonder what's down this street. Oh, I wonder what's here, you know. And I think just going out with that air of wonder about your home city, yeah, you can lead you on to things you wouldn't even realize were there, you know. And it's incredible what there is, you know, just on your doorstep. And I think the more you get to know your local area, your local environment, your local walks, the more proud you are of them and the more you want to invest in them and look after them. And there's so many community schemes now, aren't there, you know, like wildflower planting in towns and cities to get involved in. And yeah, it's just brilliant.
Yeah, I think we're always too focused, aren't we, on getting from A to B, and we don't sort of bother to think about anything other than the end destination and, you know, how we're going to get there as fast as we can. And we need
definitely
to a bit of time.
Yeah, I did feel a bit like an alien, the speed I was walking compared to everybody else in London.
But I mean, you know, London has been showcased so much, hasn't it, with the Queen's funeral? I would imagine, you know, lots of international visitors are really wanting to descend on London soon and actually explore it for themselves. So this urban hike could be a great way for them to actually see things that they might not see otherwise. They'd see the main sites, obviously, but not these little gems that, you know, that you're describing to people. Do you think that people will, you know, hopefully find out about the trail and start to do it a little bit more?
I hope people do get off the beaten track, yeah, because I think it can completely change your impression, can't it, of a place, you know. And for a lot of the tourists who come, they'll probably have set venues that they'll want to go and see and, you know, have a preconception of what London or Manchester will be like. Whereas if you just take that time to get off the beaten track and just go these unusual little quirky places, I think it can completely change how you feel about a city. Yeah. And hopefully people will want to come back, won't they, as well?
Definitely. So sort of moving on to Manchester now, you know, I'm a bit ashamed to say it's only an hour from where I live, but I know so little about Manchester, you know, a little bit about St. Peter's Square and Chinatown, and that's about it. So was it as exciting to do the Manchester route as it was to do the London route?
It was so different. Was it as exciting? It probably wasn't as exciting in terms of I love finding new places. So because London was so new to me, that had a real excitement about it. Manchester had a completely different feeling. It was my home city. Yeah. So there was a you know, a real warmth about it and just a real pride of, wow, this is where, you know, I grew up and you know, went out as a teenager in my formative years. So there was a warmness to it that I knew it. But then actually after a few days, you know, discovering the areas that are redeveloping now, so around Ashton Canal, Cottonfield, you know, those places now are becoming big urban parks. And there I did start to get a little bit of a buzz. Because I suppose, like you were saying, you can get off the train, get off the metro and just go straight to, you know, places of work or bars or whatever. And so I'd never really walked the canals. You know, I didn't want to do that when I was 18. So actually going around that part of Manchester now and seeing the redevelopment and such beautiful green spaces they're creating on the edge, and just things like there's an old keeper's cottage, that you can walk past.
Right.
It's just like stepping back 250 years, and places where the kids can run around and see wildlife, and like the parks in London with pelicans, just so for me, Manchester it felt very homely, very warm, and just lovely to see it with a different mindset.
And I guess because of the Industrial Revolution, there was much more of that sort of building involved in this trail, sort of the old factory units and things like that, the old, I guess, more museums perhaps.
Lots of cotton mills, huge amount of old cotton mills around sort of Ancoats area. And you can look inside a lot of them through these little brass peepholes called the Ancoats peeps, and they're great because they give you a little insight into what was in some of the old mills. Because I remember as a child going to Style Mill near Manchester, which I think most school children went to, and just being fascinated by just kind of how barbaric that industry was, for the children working there, and now to see a lot of those big mills in Manchester now, really trendy houses and flats and restaurants and bars with all these urban gardens between them, it's really fascinating what they've done. It's incredible. And I'm so pleased that all these old iconic buildings are still there.
Yeah, and haven't been knocked down and just cleared away. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess you revisited Affleck's as well, and
absolutely, where I used to get all my Doc Martens from. And that hadn't changed at all. No, still exactly the same vibe. I think it's such a strong vibe, that place. I don't think it ever will.
Such an iconic part, isn't it? The real feature on the landscape. So what was the most exciting thing that you discovered in Manchester, would you say?
Most exciting thing? Oh, that's a tricky one. I think it's just how they're, just I was saying earlier about how they are making it a much greener city. Because I don't, as a teen, I didn't think of it in that respect at all. It was just a great, fun, vibrant city to go out on a Friday and Saturday night. So I was just so excited to see how they are, intertwining all this concrete, and amazing architecture with the natural world. It's just absolutely fascinating how they're doing that, and that they're doing it not just horizontally but vertically as well, and right up to the top of the high-rise flats, roof gardens, secret gardens. I just think it's absolutely fascinating. So I was really excited by that. It gave me a lot of hope, because I think we need to do this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you found a fish market as well. I never knew that Manchester.
Oh, yes. I didn't know about the fish market until I discovered it. So there's the beautiful arches of the fish market, the Victorian fish market. And then I found out they'd got a charter to hold markets in Manchester in 1066. So there's been markets there since that date. Wow. I think there were 3 or 4 in the Victorian period. And it would have been a really vibrant place with barrow boys rattling up and down the street, and you could buy everything from, buns to books, and it was just absolutely fascinating.
A very Oliver Twist in a way.
Yes. And over the road from the fish market, there's a bar you can go into, but you have to go through a laundrette and open the door of a washing machine to get into it. It's just this like quirkiness.
That's a bit Harry Potter, isn't it? A bit King's Cross Station kind of thing. So has anything, these trails were written a few years ago, has anything sort of come along since you wrote the trails that you wish you'd been able to include in the trails? Any new features that unfortunately weren't there when you wrote them, or do you think that what you've written is really as it is and nothing new would have come along to actually alter them?
There's a couple of memorials there now, which I'd like to go and visit. I mean, I was there on the day of the bombing in 96, and that had quite a profound effect on me when I was a teen. So to sort of go back with a different mindset again of remembrance would be a really interesting day, actually. I think I'd find that quite emotional. So any sort of future maps, I'd definitely include those on it. And I think also just these cool, when I say cool, I mean temperature cool urban space that you can go to now, because it is so hot in the city now on a summer's day, you know, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of, you know, traffic, and they heat up, you know, you're talking 40 degrees on some days.
Yeah.
So I think I would like to include places, because these trails are more popular in summer, little places where you can go for a bit of time out, you know, these secret gardens around Sackville Street that they're creating. I think it'd be really great to put those on as well.
Yeah. It sounds like a really good idea, especially with mental health and, you know, people needing some solitude, sometimes some thinking time, just somewhere to go and sit and get away from it all, you know.
I think that's right. And there's always places like that. And, you know, around Manchester, we're so drawn to water, aren't we? And there are some great places by the canals. And yes, a lot of the water has been diverted underneath, but as humans, we're really attracted to that. And so to find little places where you can just sit in a nice, cool place by the water, by the canals, would be great to add on as well.
So I guess, you know, would you say that undertaking these trails is good for fitness and exercise? Because I'm always surprised that when you go to a city, you just don't realise how many kilometres you're actually clocking up. You know, if you go to the countryside, you kind of think, oh, it's this amount of distance from this point to that, and you kind of know what you're going to be walking, but you can just walk so much further in a city than you imagine, can't you?
Absolutely, yeah, brilliant for fitness. Walking is just such a fantastic way of exercising. I love it. It's my favourite way to get about. I used to do a lot of running. You know, you can go for a jog around a lot of these city parks. It's fantastic. But, you know, I think a lot of the wonder and the fascination from doing these trails is that you're slowing down. So I wouldn't encourage people necessarily to go out and use them as training, although you could just use the route. But for me, it's about just slowing down and walking.
So where do you think you might focus on next for an urban trail? Have you got any plans for future urban trails?
I've done one at the East Village, also in London, which again was a very sort of urban area, but it's next to a wetland. So I did that about a time traveling swamp creature.
So that was more in keeping with your Cumbrian trail.
So more in keeping with the Cumbrian one. So that was a real mix of an urban trail and a tail trail. And that did work actually. That was fun to do that. So I think I'd like to carry on that theme to cities that I call home now, you know. So for me, my local city is Carlisle, and it's been wonderful the past 20 years discovering more about Carlisle. You know, my children were born there, and I love visiting the cathedral. And again, I've just started going down all these little quiet back corners, you know, and discovering a little bit about the history and the culture around Carlisle. So I think, yeah, it would be great to do some further north as well. Yeah.
Because Carlisle Cathedral itself has some really interesting features, doesn't it?
Oh, it's beautiful. The roof, yeah.
Yeah. And haven't they got little hidden people or something? Little
faces. Yeah. Yeah. And there's just fantastic little bookshops, you know, and cafes just in the historic quarter that you just wouldn't know were there, you know. It's just been really lovely. And some of the more unusual places like the graveyard, you know, places like that, which is a bit odd to sort of wander around, but actually the architecture and the feeling around them it's quite magical.
What's your advice for somebody wherever they live this weekend, if they're, you know, thinking about what to do and how to tackle this? What should be their starting point for sort of going and exploring their town or their city?
I think you've got to go. I think having a focal point is quite good. You know, you're going up a mountain, you want to get to the top, don't you? Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But a lot of people would have that as a focal point or an end point. I think it's quite good if you're going to explore a city, just to have maybe 2 or 3 places that you'd be really interested to see, that you're keen to get to, a bit like a summit. But not to go with much more of a framework than that. You know, just a loose idea of distance. 5K, I think, is a really good distance for a walk. You feel like you've done something, but it's not too far to start.
Yeah.
And just a couple of places, you know, that you want to visit. And I think everything else, the best part of it seems to always come spontaneously for me. You know, I can plan to do a certain thing, but if you see somewhere interesting, go down it, you know, and have an explore and stop and take time and just be quiet for a minute and listen, you know. And I think just going with that open mindset with a bit of curiosity is the best thing.
Yeah. And I suppose finally, just if people are in Manchester or in London and they're lucky enough to be in those locations, where can they get your urban hike guide and how do they go about that?
So you can still download it for free from Regatta's website. So if you just type in Regatta Urban Hike Manchester or Regatta Urban Hike London, because they sponsored it, then you can download it for free. And there's instructions about the route and some little maps as well.
Yeah. And is it on your website as well or not?
Yeah, there's a link from my website. If you go on the walks page, there's also a link to the one around East Village in London, and also Blackpool, which was an urban hike, as it turned out, even though, you know, we did go onto the sea defence. There was a lot of it was along the promenade.
Oh, right. I didn't realise that, because obviously, you know, I live on Blackpool's doorstep. So
yeah,
what did you discover there?
So
did
Blackpool,
you do the sculptures? Because I have written about all the sculptures on the promenade. Was that?
Yes, we put the sculptures on.
Yeah.
But it was Cumbria Wildlife Trust were really interested in the sea creatures that were living in the sea defence.
Oh, okay.
So even though the sea defence is man-made, there's big giant hexagons, aren't there, on there to diffuse the energy of the waves.
Yeah.
But lots of incredible little creatures decided to call that place home.
Oh.
And it's just, each one is like a unique little ecosystem. So it was just a lovely little map about one of these little barnacles called Buck, who decides that he likes Blackpool very much and wants to make it his home.
And where do people find that trail then, Anja?
So again, if you just go onto Tail Trails website, onto the walks page, there's a link where you can download it on there.
No, don't be shy. Tell us what the URL is for Tail Trails.
Yeah, it's just tailtrails.co.uk. So TALETRAILS.co.uk.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Anja, for coming on and telling us about that.
Pleasure.
Keep us up to date with all your next adventures, which I'm sure there'll be lots of. But thanks once again. So there we are. Plenty of reason to go out into your local town or city centre and start looking up and down as well as straight ahead. We'd love to know what new things you discover. So if you find something interesting that you never knew about, please tell us. Just drop me an email at jane@catapultpr.co.uk. Perhaps we can share some of your findings in a forthcoming episode. In the meantime, just remember that life's much more fun when you're poodling around.